If you don't know who the Quilt Police are, you might be one of them. I'm sorry, it's true. Just check yourself. My name's Mary, and I'm going to talk about the Quilt Police today. The Quilt Police is a term that refers to any person who makes you feel bad about the quilt you're making, or how you're making it, or the colors that you've chosen, or even like your skills as a person who likes to make quilts. Like if your skills aren't as good as they ought to be by now, or if you don't make enough quilts. Like any negging of any kind is a Quilt Police thing. I mean, it might just be somebody who's being a jerk, but all Quilt Police people are jerks, but not all jerks are Quilt Police people. I think people who make quilts on a regular basis can agree. It's really fun. Sometimes you get bored with something. It's like completely legit to be bored with a project. Sometimes you make something that just doesn't work. Sometimes you wonder what you were thinking. But most of the time, the reason there are millions and millions of quilt makers in America is because it's freaking fun, man. It's like really great. You like sit down at the sewing machine and you're like listening to a podcast or talking to a friend or watching, a Fargo, which I'm obsessed with. So it's really great. You're just like making something that stays there, for a while. I mean, and you can make something, you can make a puzzle go together. You can make a cake. And these things are nice. Definitely, I will eat your cake while I'm putting a puzzle together. But those things go away. And a quilt, part of the magic of it is that it sticks around, and that's nice. Sometimes they last a long, long time, longer than the human being who made the quilt. So it's really fun to do that, to make quilts. You have something beautiful at the end of your efforts, hopefully, that stays around. So if you make one quilt and you feel this way, you're probably going to make another one, and you're probably going to make another one. And the more quilts you make, the more likely you are to encounter the Quilt Police. Although people who become the Quilt Police, it's not like they take an order of quilt policing. It's not an order. Well, sometimes it feels like some sort of unholy order of people who, neg you on your quilts. But you're probably going to encounter these folks. Oh, and if you don't know who the Quilt Police are, you might be one of them. I'm sorry, it's true. Just check yourself. You know that you've encountered a Quilt Police person if they have sort of a sour look on their face at all times when in the presence of people making quilts. It's like, if you ask for someone's opinion on something, or even if you don't, at a guild meeting or at a show, if you receive then you may have encountered a Quilt Police person. And the thing is, I have opinions about stuff that I like. Quilts that I think, well, bless your heart, I've made quilts and I feel like that about some of my quilts. People have opinions, and you can have things that you like, and you can have things that you just would never do. That's good. That means you have a point of view. But there's a difference between having an opinion and dipping into that jerk territory, where instead of just having a feeling about a thing, you have to express yourself about that feeling that you have about a certain quilt. And God help you, the person who made it is standing anywhere near you when you do that. Because it hurts when you hear any of the following things. That's not a quilt, that's art. This one happens a lot for people who like to make art quilts. A lot of the modern style quilts, especially the ones that are made for shows, for competitions, are very much like art quilts. They're made to go on the wall and not the bed. And these quilts are of a different style, a different breed, if you will, and they are artful, but it doesn't mean that they're not a quilt. So sometimes the Quilt Police, they can come in with that, where it's like, whatever you thought you made, it isn't even a quilt. I reject it out of hand. That hurts, because if somebody is like made it, and they definitely intended it to be a quilt and whatever. It's like it's definitely delegitimizing their art, and that sucks. The second thing you might hear from a quilt police person is, look at her hair. Oh, I'm sorry. That's just something that quilt police people say to me, because I've been on camera for a long time, and my hair is never acceptable. It's never been acceptable to me. I don't like brushing it. I don't like combing it. I don't really like to get it cut. I change it constantly because it's just like a magical mystery to me. That like someday I'll get the formula and it'll be exactly the way I want it to be, and it never is. So I've dealt with a lot of, but that's not even like quilt policing. That's just shade. Shade. Who cares? Who cares what my hair looks like? Who cares? Have you ever been in a place, any place, and someone says to you, aren't you hot? Like, in what you're wearing? Like, aren't you hot wearing that sweater? Aren't you, oh my God, aren't you hot? Don't you want to take off your coat? The reason I find this problematic is because I can regulate my own temperature. I am able to do that. I am a grown person. And I know so many times people are just trying to be helpful. They care about people. And so you want to help. But like, it's someone's body. They can probably deal with it. And what I have felt, and I'll tell you where this comes from, if I can be a little bit personal about this. What else is there? When I was a budding youth, I was self-conscious, I got like, I got boobs like overnight, okay? They weren't there. And then finally it was like, wow. And that was super fun, but also not at all. And I tended to like wear, a sweater more. I don't think it really helped, but I felt more comfortable in that. And I just remember like being asked, aren't you hot? It was like, yes, I am hot. I am hot because I hate my body, okay? Like I have to do this because I'm just trying to live. And so when I was pointedly asked, this is really becoming quite the tangent, but it's important when you're asked like, what's wrong? It was essentially like, what are you hiding or what's wrong with you, And it like, there was nothing I could really say. So don't do that. But the quilt police, it's a similar kind of thing. When someone says, aren't you putting a border on that? You're going to use that dark green? It's like, well, yes, I am. Or no, I'm not. Or, aren't you going to something that first? It's really kind of in the way that a person asks it that makes them the quilt police versus somebody who's just like genuinely interested in what you're making. It's just about diplomacy, and also kind of not being convinced that you have the right answer. I mean, who always has the right answer? Very few people always have the right answer. And I think the quilt police in general kind of think that they have the right answer. It's like, well, you're not going to do that, are you? Because the only way to do it is this way, my way. So don't ask someone if they're hot unless they've said, how I am not feeling well. And then they're sweating, and then you can say, are you hot? Even then, maybe they're not. With people who are making quilts with you, around you, showing you their quilt, I don't know. Just remember, like, it's emotional. It's creative. Whenever you're doing something creative and someone stomps you, it sucks. You feel bad. You really try hard on something and you're like, you're making something that has no guide, really. You're kind of trying to, well, you can make a pattern and a quilt from a kit, but if you're like designing something or you're making something a little out of the box, as soon as somebody comes along and tells you, what you're doing is bad, it's really hard, it's like they're saying that you're bad. Maybe I'm too sensitive. It's happened my whole life. Maybe that means that I am good at recognizing when the quilt police are afoot. So I'm your little emotional like litmus test, your canary in the quilt police coal mine. Okay, another thing that I hear from the quilt police is actually something that I don't hear. Stony silence. Stony silence is a very interesting tactic. People who go for the stony silence when they don't approve, or when they find something problematic, or when they're angry. Most people take like silence after a question or comment that is, when you're engaged with someone in conversation, or you're, at a quilt show and your quilt's hanging up there and you're like, wow, I'm really proud of it. Do you like it? And there's just silence. Like, this is not going to inspire confidence. And it's true with really anything. If you're having a conversation with someone and they just go quiet, I find it very passive aggressive. I do. I think it's a strange thing. So, but it's very effective. It's very effective. And so if, you're making a quilt, or, you show a quilt on YouTube, or at a quilt show in some public way, or at a show and tell, if you're at a guild meeting, show and tell, and you're like, this is my quilt that I loved making. And if no one says much, come up with something. If you're not a Quilt Police person, you will have no problem thinking of something to say, like, wow, you put so much work into that. And I know a lot of us can kind of sense when we haven't stuck the landing, we haven't totally hit it out of the park with anything, a quilt, a piece of writing, a cake. We can tell when someone's like, well, bless your heart. Well, this, we can really tell how hard you worked on this. You can kind of tell, but it's like the etiquette of the thing. Like, you need to say something, just being quiet is super lame. So yeah, so the stony silence, pursed lips at the show and tell, that's quilt policing, because you're basically saying it's not good enough. You're basically saying, I don't like it, and I'm not going to give you an inch about it, which sucks. Okay, the last thing I have to say about the Quilt Police, because why give them any more airtime? I think I've made my point. The last thing is kind of a warning in a way. Quilt Police are notorious for turning up their nose at the new stuff. The new stuff. When raw edge applique was the thing, people, oh my God, you'll still hear it too. It's like, oh, you machine appliqued that? Well, that's cheating. This literally has been said many, many times, crushing the heart and soul of the person who was like, I made this cool thing and I used my machine to applique it. And it's like, oh, well, you thought you did something cool, but you didn't. Cheater. Ridiculous. The new stuff makes people scared. If you start saying new stuff is bad, then you might be a Quilt Police person. My mom told me when she was at the Paducah show, the AQS show, back in the 80s, Carol Bryant Fallert made a quilt called Corona 2. And I finally saw this quilt, and it was magnificent. And it was magnificent back when it won Best of Show at the Paducah show. And it was the first quilt that won Best of Show there that had been machine quilted, ever. That was the first time that a machine quilted quilt won Best of Show. And my mom said that it was pandemonium when this was announced. Women sat down on the curb in Paducah, Kentucky and cried. Quilting is over, they said. This is it, it's done. You might as well just stop making quilts because they are made by robots. It was ridiculous. I mean, it's ridiculous. And it does feel hard to have new stuff happen because you think, the world is falling apart, the first time a microchip is used to make a quilt, well, actually, microchips are being used to make quilts because our sewing machines are so advanced, they have computers inside of them, but the first hologram quilt, it's gonna feel weird to the establishment. Anything new, it's the shock of the new, right? It's like, oh God, everything's changing. But anytime you find yourself saying, that's, it's all over now with quilts and everything's changing and these people don't know, what they're doing. Just check yourself, because people thought Elvis was the devil, and then they thought Tupac was the devil, Lady Gaga, and it's like the music, if you think the music is just total trash that the kids are listening to, you are getting older, and that, but Gucci Mane, it's great. He just is. All the rappers that I like, I really, really like. And I know that the music sounds very, very different from a lot of the other music that came before, but that's why That's why it's good to be alive, man. People keep living, and the music changes, and the sewing machines change, and the quilts change too. Whatever happens next is probably going to be scandalous, even if it's just a whole army of people making quilts poorly, quote unquote, because they started making quilts in the pandemic and they don't know what they're doing, and there's just like an ocean of like, you know, really basic quilts out there. But you know what? That's the point. Like, that is the point of this whole little video. If people are making quilts, that's good. Period. Why is it good? Because making a quilt is making something with your hands. Making a quilt usually means that somebody other than you is going to benefit because you're going to give it to them, or you're going to donate that quilt, or it just helps you like keep your sanity so you can be there for the people in your life. Making a quilt is, it's cloth, and cloth is comfort in so many ways. Quilts are documents, they are journals in their way, they are artifacts, and making a quilt is good. And it doesn't matter what kind you make, and it doesn't matter how good it is, it doesn't matter how long it takes you, it doesn't matter who you are, what you're supposed to know, where you came from, what you do know, and it doesn't matter what materials you're using. They can be really fancy materials from the quilt shop, they can be hand-me-downs, they can be cut-up clothes, they can be stuff from the thrift store. It just doesn't matter. And if you want to do a quilt, make a quilt that, you know, you can submit to a show, and you want to win, and you want it to be perfect, like, hell yes, go for it, do it. Revel in your dopeness. Be happy that you're like the bomb with, you know, your free motion foot. But anybody who's doing anything different or less than that, quote unquote, this should mean nothing to you. It should mean nothing to you. It should mean only that you have a sister or brother in your love of a thing. So, Quilt Police, don't ask somebody if they're hot. Don't tell them to comb their hair. Don't be mean. And just like embrace anyone who's making a quilt. That's it. Whatever it looks like, whatever you think about it. Wow, there are so many more bad things than that that we could spend our time thinking about and changing. So there's my little video. I probably talk about the Quilt Police too much, but and here's my tiny violin moment, I have felt the Quilt Police very, very hard in my life because I learned how to make quilts on public television with this hair. Can you believe it? I mean, I looked at the Facebook comments once in my life when I was doing the TV thing because it was horrible. People who didn't like me just loved to talk about it, and it was really, really hard. And life's hard enough, man. I mean, just keep it out of the quilt stuff because that's the worst. So I hear you. I see you. I see you. If you have been attacked or even just like nagged by somebody who's mean about you and your quilts, I think it's really messed up. So don't do that. If you see something, tell them to fuck off. Bye.